Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast with your hosts, Betsy Westhafer and Tony Bodo. Join Betsy and Tony as they dive in with highly successful C-suite leaders who have grown successful organizations by creating a laser focus on listening to their customers and building deep customer relationships. Now, it's time to join Betsy and Tony for the Really Know Your Customer show.
Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast. My name is Tony Bodo, CEO of Tony Bodo International.
And I'm Betsy Westhafer, CEO of the Congruity Group. We're so excited that you're here today, and we have another great interview for you.
Oh yeah, Betsy, I'm excited about having Doug Brown with us today because we get into a conversation that over the last several episodes, if the audience has been listening carefully, they've heard this shift that's been happening in some of our interviews. And that shift very specifically is, number one, we're talking about the experience the consumer has, or the customer, whether B2B or B2C, the experience in the sales process and how important that has become over the last few years. Secondly, we're going to be really talking about this idea, and I don't have the attribution for this. I heard someone use this term and I absolutely love it, the consumerization of the B2B sales cycle. In other words, in business, people want to be treated like people. And you and I, in the profitability book we wrote in 2018, we talked about that. Business to business is really person to person. And it's just becoming more and more evident for people out there. So as you listen through today's conversation, listen from two perspectives. One, listen from the perspective of what can you learn about B2B sales and how it's shifted, especially in the recent past. And number two, listen to how Doug delivers story after story. He always finds a story that's relevant to the question that we ask him. And so he's actually preaching, if you will, his methodology of helping people grow their businesses, their sales organizations, by doing it with us on this podcast.
Yeah, I loved some of the stories he told, specifically about getting started pushing a broom at 3 for his dad's business. And then the story about tracking down his grandfather, which you will hear on this episode. It's a very cool story that makes the point. And so we all hear a lot about storytelling. And to your point, Tony, listen to this episode with a keen eye on the storytelling. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive right in with our interview with Doug Brown, CEO of Business Success Factors. Hey, Doug, welcome to the show. We're so happy you're here today.
Hey, Betsy, thanks for having me on. I'm really appreciating being here today.
Yeah, we're looking so forward to this conversation. So we're just going to dive right in. Can you just bring us up to speed on who you are, what you do, what led you down this path, and what's top of mind for you right now?
Yeah, well, who I am is Doug Brown, and I was brought down this path, I think probably by accident, really, when it came down to it, or maybe by design by my father. I'm really not sure. I started working for his company at the age of 3, sweeping floors. And I got paid 25 cents a week and I loved it. It was great. So I had my quarter at the end of the week and I could go buy candy, and that was really cool. Now, all my brothers and I worked for him at a very early age. And by the age of, say, 6, they thrust us out in front of clients and started saying, hey, write orders, take orders for people coming in. So I still don't know if my dad did this because he needed low cost labor or he was trying to teach us something. I'm really not sure. I never asked him before he passed away, but that's how I started this. And then as time went on, I got more and more responsibility in his business. And then what happened was my father actually had a heart attack. And at the age of 17, I ended up running his company.
What was it? What was the business, Doug?
My dad had an electric motor machinery repair company. And we would go in and service all types of industrial equipment. So here I am, 17 years old, talking to the CEO of a $150 million manufacturing company. And I'm having to learn all this, live fire for a while. And it was a great experience for me because I got to see a couple of things. I got to see, how leverage is created in companies. My father, we had maybe 9 employees. And I'm walking into companies that have 150 employees. And so I'm beginning to talk with these upper level owners and they're talking to me because I'm 17 and sharing some secrets with me. So I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. So that's kind of how I got the bug. And as I was going through that, I always had businesses on the side of my dad's business as well. So what I do is I actually help people and companies really achieve the top 1% of sales. So I did this for my dad's company. I did this for other companies. I did this for my own companies. And, it's all about, to me, about selling. Business is very simple. I always say this to people. It's very simple until you add people, because it's money out, money in equals something. That's really business. So I focus a lot on the money coming in, and we try to minimize the money going out, and that creates higher profitability. And we optimize those processes for people who are selling or companies who want to have more in sales.
Awesome. So tell us more about your clients. Let's get into the weeds a little bit about who you work with, the things they're trying to achieve, what you're trying to help them achieve, and so on.
Yeah, that's morphed over the years too. Now I will say that it's really those people who are looking to sell in the new economy. Like people today, it's funny, for about, I don't know, now I'm going to date my age, but about 30 years ago, I started telling people, hey, listen, this thing called dial-up, internet, it's going to change the way we sell. And then when DSL came in, I'm like, this is happening. And people were like, you're crazy. We actually should be locking you up. This is never going to change how we sell. And I go, think about it. People with a click of a mouse, they can go find all this information about stuff that they don't know about. And that means if you're selling to them, then they're going to know as much about what you're trying to say to them as, or maybe even more than right? And so they really don't need your knowledge base like they used to. It's going to change the way we have communicate and have in sales. And for those of you who scoffed at me, haha, we're here. So so what I teach people is in the new reality, right? This virtual thing we've been teaching now for well over 20 years. It's not changing. It might morph back a little more in person as, things get a little more, I would say, less stringent on the regulatory issues with the pandemic. But the reality is what's happened is now companies have realized, hey, you know what, we can be as productive or more productive running virtually. And we don't have to pay all this square meter or square footage for office space for our people. They're actually happier. We get as much done or more done. So it's really kind of the new normal, which has created a real big deal for people trying to sell, especially to people trying to sell into, higher level accounts. So I teach people how to do that and how to get in and actually take their own products or the services they're selling today, be able to accomplish that, but also be able to actually sell those sometimes for 3 to 5x what they're selling for today. A lot of companies are, not realizing the value that they actually provide. So that's kind of where it's kind of morphed to today. And that's part of helping people get into the top 1%, selling a better quality deal and to a higher value client, as well as putting some other processes around doing that.
Can I take you a step back for a second here? Because you addressed something and I want to hit on that really quickly because it's going to lead to some other questions I have in the interview here. So we're talking about how I think the term I've heard out there is this information democratization, right? The internet gave information to everyone. And I was in the hotel industry running customer experience for the Gaylord Hotel brand back in 2007, 2008, 9, that era when TripAdvisor was just becoming a thing, right? And we just got our iPhones in 2007 and 8. So people could literally be driving down the highway and saying, hey, do I want to go to that hotel? They'd go to TripAdvisor and see what the reviews are. So in that case, people had more information than the companies did because almost no company was watching TripAdvisor and looking at the reviews. And I was at that era where we were just starting to look at reviews because it was hitting us. It would, the questions or concerns or fake reviews or whatever else. So that era went on for a while, I would say, but we're solidly, if a company's is not out there really mining what's online, the social platforms and other information that's out there, they're behind. So how would you respond to someone who's saying, hey, I'm not even in that ballpark yet. My salespeople, they know what I teach them in class. They haven't even gone online to figure out who we are and what we do, what our customers think.
I would say that I'm sure that some son or daughter was said by their father, if you understand how to repair this carburetor, you'll have a job for life. And, today we don't have, most cars don't have carburetors, or a steam engine, right? Like, this is a technology that has changed. And so I fully agree with you, Tony, on the ability for the information. And in fact, I mean, many times a consumer now, whether it's B2B or B2C, can actually get the insider information on the company. Like, for example, Glassdoor, if you want to know how a company rates on their employee, right, satisfaction, just go to Glassdoor. Now, I'm not saying that every single thing put out on Glassdoor is accurate, or I'm not saying it's inaccurate, but I'm saying it's out there. And, if you got 30 people saying this company did X, Y, Z, it's probably going to be an issue, right? So, but I think this will answer the question probably better, Tony. Right now, statistics, and statistics can be rigged, right? But statistics show about 80% of the sales decision today is first generated by the marketing department. So you're not, as a salesperson, getting to the higher companies, especially without marketing having an influence, without the internet and information having the influence at today. So usually a lot of the decisions to talk to a salesperson are actually generated now by marketing research first. I'll give you an example. I was talking to a CEO of a $35 million fast growing company last week. And I asked him, I said, how are people actually getting to you? And he said, well, they only get to me when my marketing people tell me that we need this. And then we go out for peer-to-peer referrals. And that's how a lot of business is done today. So the internet's not only changed the information exchange, but it's more important for us to be out in what a good friend of mine and mentor, Alan Weiss, says, get into the public square. We have to be out there, because now what's happening is people are actually going and Googling or LinkedIn or whatever search they're doing this on the people they're actually involved with. And so if your person that was saying that to you is like, well, my sales team is, we're selling the way we did in 1987. Well, okay, it's time to change. I can't mention the actual name of the television station. It has 3 famous letters. And they called me and they were saying, hey, look, they had like a division of PBS type things for their particular, like public broadcasting. And their advertising sales were just down. I did an assessment on the company and I looked at the sales team and I'm like, they're trying to sell like the Tin Men were selling back in the 40s. Right. It was like, and they had people that were there for 30 something years and they've never changed their sales style. The company hasn't morphed to adopt that. And they were just really having a hard time. People who are not going to embrace, whether you like social selling or not, it doesn't matter. It's here, right? Whether we like having humanized, relevant conversations or not, it doesn't matter. That's what's here today. We have to have meaningful, humanized, relevant conversations with people, because it's not the game of sales that it used to be. It's the game of now embracing what is and taking that and adapting, right? Don't make no mistake, cold calls still work, but you got to call when the CEOs are there. So many people are trying to make cold calls in the middle of the afternoon and, they're not there. Get up early. A lot of CEOs are there at 6:30 in the morning, right? They're there at the office. So you can get them at that point. Call them on Saturday mornings. Be surprised how many people are actually there in the office or pick up the phone. So it still works. It's just, we've got to morph and change.
So when we talk about the changes here, let's move toward the pandemic and look at, the significant changes, because there were things that were happening. You and I both agree. I know Betsy and I talk about this quite a bit. There were things that were in process, but when literally March 2020 and we had to lock down, the acceleration was instantaneous. I mean, there was just whatever vector we were headed on, we just took off like a rocket ship. So So in your mind, what has really changed with the pandemic and in from a selling perspective and really from a perspective of how do you, I would say, getting to know your customer? Because if they know you, 80% of the decisions made already, they know you before they talk to you. How do you get to know them?
Well, I love that. I mean, it's really, really know your customer podcast that we're on, right? So the reality is that's the first step. And this is the part that most sales channels push back on. Because used to be marketing. I remember in the old days, especially marketing would always fight with sales. Sales would always fight with marketing, right? Because marketers go, salespeople are lazy and they make too much money. Salespeople go, hey, we can knock on doors. We can make phone calls. We don't need marketing, right? That would be the kind of the thing. And so for many years, I tried to blend those two together. I push them together in one room, shut the door and say, okay, you slug it out. I'll come back when it's done, right? And so then they would work ubiquitously along a path called a customer journey, right? That's how it's supposed to work. Part of that customer journey is really knowing the client. Who are we actually selling to? What are their motivations? What are their pains? And don't just stick with pains. Sandler sales, I embraced that early on in my life, but I can tell you now that people are looking for improvement, innovation. They're looking for strategic growth. Right? It's not just about pain any longer. They're looking for opportunities as much as they're looking for, to avoid pain, back to Tony Robbins, right? So, but it's really understanding who the person is that we're actually selling to. Now, I said person, not just company. There's two things that have shifted massively. One, people used to sell to companies and they used to think that was good. Company profile, boom, I'll be in the game, boom. No. Because now things have shifted also to the person. It always was like that, but now it's been hyper accelerated. And the reality is that we as people selling, we better embrace different generations today because the generations today are not the same generations that I was selling to 25 years ago. They have different outlooks on life. They have different ways they want to communicate. And, it's nice to know the disc style and all that type of thing. But the reality is we have to know our customers before they're our customers, or at least understand what motivates them and, what things we shouldn't be saying as much as we should be saying to them.
So it sounds like there's a bit of this idea, and we've heard this on other episodes of our podcast within the B2B space, where B2B is becoming much more like B2C, right? Where you had to know the individual, you have to really talk to them as a person. So, and the term I've heard is the consumerization of business to business. Is that kind of where what you're seeing happening as well?
Yeah, I kind of term it B2E. It's like business to entrepreneur. So it is kind of, to me, I agree with you. It's the morphing of what is happening. And it's, how do I say this? It's really now about communication. It always was, but before it was about, oh, my product or service will solve this, right? That is a professional return on an investment. But what people are forgetting about today in the new economy is people are also looking for personal return on their investment. So if you look at what's going on in the shift in the workplace, quality of life has become far more important now than actually money to a lot of people. Back when I was growing up, we never talked about quality of life. It was all about the money, right? Especially in sales. Now, don't underestimate what I'm saying to the point where you don't think salespeople are driven by monetary gain. They are, but a lot of them are driven more by significance than they are by monetary gain or recognition than monetary gain. Clients are too. I used to build these very large agency networks for my clients and myself, and utilize them for selling purposes. And so one time I won all these prizes at a company, and I took all the prizes, big TVs, all that stuff. I didn't need it, so I took it and I brought it over to my best referral partners. And I walked in and I go, "Merry Christmas" in July. And they go, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Here you go. Here's a TV." Boom. And they go, "What the heck is this for?" I said, "Well, I just wanted to recognize the fact that you guys work really hard and you might want a TV in your office. and, to kick back and relax at the end of the day. And I thought I'd go out and get one to say, I'm really appreciative of what you do with me. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Oh my God, that turned into millions of dollars worth of business, a TV. Right. So it's because I recognized them, I gave them a gift, and I treated them like human beings. And I know they were tired at the end of each day. So I'm recognizing who they are, what they stand for, and what they're looking for. One company, I used to go up every 2 months. I did this for over 2 years. I would go have Chinese food with this company. They valued Chinese food. So I'd go up and find the, best, greasiest food they liked. And we'd go up and we'd have Chinese food. And I'd sit down for 2 years. People go, why? I make a phone call month 1, Chinese food month 2, 3. I did this for 2 years straight. They go, what? Why would you do that? Because I was communicating with everybody in the company. I'm bringing them all together. It's a consensus sale at that point. Took me 2 years to close that company, but the first thing they introduced me to was NASCAR, and I closed it. So was it worth 2 years to get NASCAR? Absolutely. So the reality is that it's more so about that today as equal to than it is the professional ROI.
And how has that been? I'm sure that has been very challenging with the fact that people are distributed now. It's not like you can go to home office and see 5 people at the same time in a lot of cases. But what are you seeing, like at a 30,000 foot view of what your perspective is on how much of that we're going to continue to see versus people shifting back to, I want to be with people. I've seen a lot of conferences starting back up and,
Sure.
Trade shows and all of that. What's your feel on where that's heading long term?
I think you said it accurately. It is shifting. I think in the beginning, when I said it's not going to go back to what it was, I also believe that as well. Too many people like the fact that they can roll out of bed, take a 20-step walk to their office, and sit down and work. They don't have to drive through New York City traffic, Dallas traffic, San Francisco traffic, right? They can just, or Florida traffic, wherever they are in the country. They are finding this to be far more productive. I have a client right now, Betsy, to answer that question, like, what do you do now, right? They have 7 major people in the company. We meet on Zoom, just like we do here. However, you can send coffee and donuts to 7 people, right, in different locations. And, so if we're smart enough, that means we as the sales channel also have to invest in our clients. More, before it was like, oh, we'd get together and then we'd go and we'd sit down and we'd have lunch at a certain place. That's still coming back. Some of that's coming back. Live events are starting to come back, because people they're tired of not having human to human contact. But I believe at least half are perfectly fine the way they are today. And it's okay to see each other at a conference once in a while. It's okay to, to have Zoom conversations as well. So it's one of those things I don't think is coming back in full. And I see a lot of companies that I work with in the training industry saying, we're not even going back. Maybe once a year, but we used to do 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 events a year. We're not doing that anymore. Here's the reason why. Doesn't cost $100,000 to get a hotel. Right. So that's the reason why. So if they do 10 events a year and they go, we'll do 1, they just save themselves $900,000 on the bottom line profit, especially when the conversion rate at the event is the same as it was live.
And have you seen anything just particularly creative on the way that salespeople are addressing people? Like, I know there's a lot of talk about Zoom fatigue and, those kinds of things. Are you seeing anything that is really notable with how salespeople are getting to know their customers better or engaging with them more, displaying what those opportunities are, not just pain points?
Yeah, I think the thing is there's information on people everywhere. I recently had a 5-year drive at finding out who my real grandfather was, right? So I found him finally, right? He's no longer here, but I now know who he is and I know where I come from because I never knew. So I liken that to what salespeople have to do. It's not easy. You're going through newspapers, associations, ancestry, DNA. You're doing all of the ancestry type programs. Right? It takes a little bit, but I've learned so much about my grandfather. Right? I did not know he was, for example, he used to, for the Boston Bruins, Boston Celtics, and Boston Red Sox, he used to be a Western, in his early days, he worked for Western Union as a telegraph operator. So he was transmitting the news. Later on, he became a reporter. I never knew this. I used to go to the games. He might even have been at the games when I was there, and I never knew the man, right? So, but I've come very close to understanding who he is, where he grew up, what schools he went to, what he studied, what sports he went, and played, all of this stuff. Now, if I can do this on a person who's been deceased since 1980, I do not want to hear from a sales channel. We cannot find relevant information on our clientele today, where it's all over the place.
That's awesome.
So that brings me to another point. You, in our prep session, you talked about this idea, and I want to bring this back in again, the ideal customer profile versus the ideal customer buyer. And I think it ties into everything we've been talking about. So give us some framework there for our listeners so they can really put their mind around that and wrap it up.
Yeah. So the old days was cold call till you turn blue, right? So you could just get into the ideal customer profile was, here's the parameters of our particular client that we look for. Any company that even kind of remotely reminds you of that, they're an ideal customer. Let's go for it. Right. And so you make 100 calls, 150 calls a day. That was kind of the deal. Well, who's going to be the decision maker? Well, it's got to be the owner or the CEO, right? Unless maybe you're in a technical business and it could be the technical officer or something like that. So you'd kind of go, okay, that's my ideal client profile. Those were the old days. Okay. Well, today also there's far more consensus sales going on than there were in the past. Whether people admit it or not, they get off Zoom calls and they talk. And guess what? You as a salesperson aren't there. So they're going to talk to one another. Before, you could be in the room and they would talk to one another, and then you could handle those things. So now we have to look at who's our ideal buyers. The buyer is the person that goes, pay that check or transfer that money. That's the buyer, but there may be more than one today. There always was before, but you would be able to identify them a lot easier. So we have to identify the buyers as well as the influencers of that buyer. Now, yeah, we were supposed to do that in the old days too, but it was a lot easier. Now we have to look at who kind of touches that and ask ourselves some questions like, okay, if this was to happen, who else is influencing it? Could human resource actually influence this? Well, they're part of the buying decision then, right? So we better know what influences human resources, because if we walk in and we just go, well, I'll explain it this way, Tony. A world famous sales training organization was calling me to sell me sales training, right? My wife and I are on a call together. I'm sitting there going, this guy's pretty good, right? I'm kind of like throwing him little curve balls here and there just to see where he goes. And he gets to the end. He goes, how'd you do? I go, not bad, actually. He looked at my wife and he goes, how about you? She goes, not good. He goes, well, what do you mean? She goes, you directed every single question to Doug, not one to me. Now, here's what I want people to understand. If you don't pay attention to the influencer, there's no way in heck Dougie's buying at that point. It's not happening. I don't care what they could say. We'll send you on a world trip, right? She's upset. She's the influencer. She's the real buyer when it comes down to it of this. So the reality is we have to pay attention to everybody today, not just that person. And we want to, just like we did in the old days, we want to build in all of the objections for those people that might come up, all of the fears, all of the desires, all of the things that we think could come up, we got to build into the upfront conversation in the form of stories and, quite frankly, humor, if you can use it, because people love to laugh.
It's interesting. One of the things I know Betsy and I have picked up on as we talk to typically technology companies today, but this is spreading. We see the wave out there, and it's this idea of, we need to know not just the executive who's making the decision or the executive influencer in this case, but for technology companies, it's the user. And I say this is spreading because even if you look in the medical industry and you've got the nurses that are using the products, one of the people we spoke to very early on in our podcast, they sell to the military. Well, they knew that they had to talk to the people who were going to be using the tools and that they created. And so they talk to the end user, because the end users actually in today's world seem to be much more influential than ever before. But again, it's that kind of consensus you're talking about. You get a group of end users together, try this product out. What do you guys think? Then the influencer above them reports back to the buyer. So it's multiple levels deep in the organization. How do you handle those situations? How do you really get to know what the users want if they're not necessarily in the room?
You talk to them, you call them, you email them, you social media ping them.
That's a novel idea. I'm sorry. It's a novel idea.
I know this is like worldly information, right? But we communicate with these people on all levels, just like you're speaking about, Tony. I remember I was working for a company, very large company, and I was the top rep in the company at that point. And I remember them saying, we're going to bring in SAP, which is a fine product. I'm not pinging on SAP. And we want you now to put every little name in this system. We want you to track every little conversation. We want you to track every single interaction that's happening. We want to know everything about that. And I'm calculating in my head how much money this is going to cost me. And so after they were done with their company-wide presentation, I walked into the director of sales office. I shut the door and he says, "You got to do this." That's the first thing. He didn't even say hello. "You have to do this." I said to him, "There's no way I'm doing this." He goes, "You have to. It's company mandated." I said, "Look, you have two choices here. This is going to cost me over $25,000 that I just calculated in my head. So either I get to hire an assistant or you hire me an assistant to do all of this stuff, or I will leave and go to our competition and take the business with me." Now, I know that sounds kind of harsh, but top producers think this way. So if we're not talking to the end user, the top producer in this case, or the other people, just as you said, Tony, what we're going to do is we're going to miss the motivation. And I, as a top producer, oh, by the way, they hired me an assistant, right? I was out selling teams 9-1. They don't want to lose that. And I get it. And I didn't want to take all my time. I had two little kids. I wanted them to go to college. I wanted all kinds of motivational things to happen for my children, right? So it's one of those things that if they talk to the end users, and especially now with, I'll say, the millennials making more decisions and things of that nature, it's more important to talk to them than ever. Because what will happen is that groundswell will happen underneath. And even though executive management looks at it and goes, "Well, this seems pretty good," then they're going to get, the people marching in the street, so to speak, and all of that groundswell will come up and they'll say, "Oh, geez, we didn't realize this. We want to put the brakes on this situation at this moment until we figure it out."
Yeah. So even if they bring a product in, you get the initial sale, they may not get the renewals, which a lot of products have gone toward now.
Right. Because it's all about membership. Amazon, anybody was trying to make that, very famous, right, in the process of doing that. And the reality is, SAP, if they had to talk to me initially and said, "Hey, listen, I want to talk to you top 5 salespeople in the company." We had 315 salespeople, so they wouldn't have been that hard to get a hold of somebody. But if they had to talk to me and they said, "What do you need?" And they built that into their presentation, like, "Oh, and for those of you who are aspiring or are at the top producing level in the company, this will help you be 25% more productive. And let me show you how." I would have been like, "Oh, no problem." Right? But they didn't. So that's what happened.
Doug, this time has gone so fast. I just looked at the clock. I can't believe how fast this conversation has gone. So before we let you go, as you are probably aware on our show, we always like to let our guests give out a shout out to a charitable organization or just an organization that you think is doing really good to give back to the community. Is there anybody that you'd like to shine a spotlight on?
Yeah, can I make it local community?
Of course, yeah.
I actually did some work for a company called the Battered Women's Society in Manchester, New Hampshire. And I'd like to give a shout out to them because they do such a great job at handling, domestic issues for women. And to me, it's a, near and dear cause to my heart. So that's my shout out.
Thank you very much. We'll look for the link and put that in our show notes as well.
Thank you.
Doug, thank you so much for your time. Tony, any last questions?
Well, there's always more questions, Betsy. You know that. But no, this is such a good conversation. I mean, it's been really powerful, and you've given us a lot of insight to things that we've hinted at in other shows, but I don't think we've gone as deep into the sales process. And I really love that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Doug. We really appreciate your time, your energy, your stories. I love the story about your grandfather. That was really cool. Thank you so much. And just keep us posted on what's going on in your world. Thanks,
Betsy. Thanks, Tony. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Well, I got to tell you, one of the pieces that I really loved in this show, Betsy, is where he talks about getting to know your customer. Of course, really know your customer show. What else would I love, right? But in particular, he's talking about how salespeople used to push back on marketing and say, well, I don't need that marketing stuff. Now, salespeople are pushing back on getting to know their customer as an individual, not just the company profile. So I love that we went into such depth in that particular area and got some ideas of how the listeners can do that. And, if you're a CEO or the leader in a large company, sales may not be your particular role and function. We get that. But if your sales team is not doing what Doug has outlined here, you are behind the 8 ball. Remember, about 80% of the sales decision is made before the customer ever picks up the phone or sends an email to contact your company.
Yeah. And one of the things that he said, Tony, that really struck me, he talked about a term he refers to as B2E. And in my mind, I'm thinking business to everybody, business to enterprise, business to the entire company. I was trying to think of all these words, and he said it was the business to entrepreneur. And, even people who are employed can have an entrepreneurial mindset. You don't necessarily have to own your own company to have the mindset of an entrepreneur. And I would go out on a limb and say that a lot of leadership teams have people that think like entrepreneurs. And so I just thought that was really an interesting perspective, kind of piggybacking onto the, people to people versus business to business, but really thinking like how getting into their heads as somebody that's trying to grow a company. So all in all, I thought it was just such an interesting, fascinating interview. And I am quite confident that our audience felt the same way.
I want to tap on something. Normally don't jump in here after you, but
no,
I just
go ahead,
had
Tony.
This idea that occurred to me is, it's kind of an insight from the show. Instead of, we used to talk about what's in it for me, right? That's how we used to sell to people, right? But I think one of the key things that Doug points to in here, and it was around that the entrepreneur side of things, right? The B2E. He talked about how people really care about the significance and quality of life. And so making improvements. So it's no longer just about resolving my pain, but it's also about how do I make the world a better place? How do I make my company a better place? And I think that's the essence of the entrepreneur. How do I make things better for other people, not just myself?
Agreed, Tony. That's a great way to conclude your thoughts on this. I'm glad you did jump in. And that was a key point. I really embraced that point of the conversation. So with that, we're going to wrap up another episode of the Really Know Your Customer podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Really Know Your Customer. We hope you gained a lot of value from being here today. If you want to learn more about the work Betsy and Tony do to help their clients thrive, visit Betsy at thecongruitygroup.com and Tony at tonybodo.com. See you next time on the Really Know Your Customer show.